G'day and welcome to this analysis of Chapter 7 of Kate Constable's Crow Country. This is an interesting chapter because everything changes at this point. At the end of Chapter 6 we saw Sadie going through this experience where she couldn't tell whether she was in the real world or in a dream world, and here we have the first example of Sadie's slipping back in time. So you have to read this chapter understanding that what we're really doing is we're exploring a different world. We're exploring a new world for Sadie, still through Sadie's eyes almost, but from a different perspective. So it becomes a little confusing at times. So if you do find yourself confused, don't stress. You just need to keep going, and these time slips become a little bit more frequent and you become more familiar with them and you'll understand them more clearly. So just persist with them for now. Alright, having a look here, we've got quite a few quotations that are important that we should probably go through. And you'll notice it opens with this darkness. Though the darkness was thick as porridge all around her. So we ended the last chapter in darkness, we start this new one in darkness. It's a really good segue between the two, and it's almost as if she's almost being born out of something and into this particular time or this particular world. Anyway, so she runs on home, she heads towards this light, and then we get this self-talk of hers. "Nothing to be frightened of, you silly duffer," she scolded herself. "What's got into you? Scared of the Hoboyas?" Now, this is a reference to a fairy tale, actually, and it's a Perth-based fairy tale. So the language itself is different, even for someone like Sadie. You wouldn't really see her referring to herself as a duffer, a silly duffer. So there's an indication there too that her character is changing at least a little bit as well. And that sort of self-talk is reference to her like supernatural elements and things that she might be frightened of, and those fears that she might things in the darkness that might concern her. And then it moves on to this big paragraph here. And somewhere inside her was Sadie, thinking in amazement, "Who am I? This isn't me. I've turned into someone else." But somehow she wasn't concerned about this unexpected transformation. She was astonished but not anxious. She walked steadily towards the shop, towards home, the lamplight streaming from the kitchen and from the basket of eggs from Mrs. Williams on her arm. So even though Sadie understands she's in a different world, she's not overwhelmed by it to the point where she's frightened. She's intrigued by it. She wants to really know what's going on. So we're still uncertain of the time, but essentially what it is Sadie's stepping back into a past life of sorts. And you'll notice the description here. Mum was draining a saucepan of potatoes. John was at the table. Even through these descriptions of the family, it's a little bit different. She never refers to Ellie, really, as her mum, or doesn't call her mum, calls her Ellie. Maybe in dialogue she might call her mum, but when she's describing her, it's always Ellie. So we've got a different figure here, a different way of viewing someone in that mothering role, and by giving them the title of mum. So it's showing us that Sadie sees these characters very differently, or has a different sort of relationship with them. And we've got this introduction to this new character, John, as well, who's at the table with his school books. It continues. Sadie, without thinking, pulled open the right drawer, found a fork and began to mash the potatoes. She looked round for the milk jug and found that and the butter dish on the table. She added milk and butter to the potatoes, beating them to a creamy mash, just the way Dad likes them, she found herself thinking. Now this can't be Sadie, because she's in this different world, but she's finding her way around this kitchen and where everything is. And then she's referring to things just the way Dad likes them. Again, this can't be her. She's experiencing the world from someone else's perspective. Sadie knew that these weren't her thoughts. They belonged to someone else. She wondered, without panic, whose thoughts they were, whose life she had stepped into. So Sadie's become aware almost of what's happening. She can't perhaps believe it, but she's aware that she stepped into someone else's life. And now she needs to work out who. As the story progresses, it sort of shows her familiarity with this place, and then we get the introduction to some more characters. But the important one really is the one that's left to last, and that's Clary. And it says here, Clary. That name seemed familiar. How did she know that name? She shook her head. Of course she knew the name of her own father. What in the world was the matter with her tonight? So, it's not actually Sadie who's forgotten her father's name. It's Sadie from our world, from the world of the present, who's trying to remember where she's seen that name before. And for those of you who pick up on it more quickly, you'll remember that was one of the names on the war memorial outside the RSL, or outside the pub. It continues. We finally get the context. We finally get the date of Friday, June 23, 1933. And Sadie realises she's slipped into a different time period, the time period of the 1930s. And as she understands this, comes to this realisation, she starts to feel a bit unwell. And at this point, she kind of takes a back seat, just as an observer in the scene. She watches things unfold in both this chapter and the next one, really. So we get her perspective on things because she's there as the first person observer. To finish off the chapter, there's this reference here to she needs a good dose of cod liver oil, which is a very old-fashioned remedy for all sorts of illnesses. An absolutely revolting flavour, but people swore of its medicinal properties. Very typical Australian, iconic Australian remedy, I suppose. And then it ends with this darkness again. And then she was dreaming. She was swept into a place where the night was thick as treacle, a place of fire and song and strange swirling dances, and black feathered figure loomed out of the dark, and its sharp beak opened, and its scream rang out. So again, more of these sort of crow references and imagery that's associated with the spirit of war. And so even in the flashback, she's falling asleep and enters a dream world that has references to these crows, and it's plaguing all of her thoughts, regardless of whichever world she finds herself in. Now, it's a confusing chapter, but stick with it and you'll be right. You'll understand how these flashbacks work as you experience more of them. Hope that's helped you understand the chapter a bit more. I'll see you again for an analysis of chapter 8. This has been an ETV production brought to you by Prindiville Catholic College.